Rome, 101 BC. On the Bestias bridge, spanning the Tiber River, a man kneels on the freezing stone. He is naked, his body writhing in a rhythmic tremor, not from the winter chill, but from the realization of the nightmare awaiting him. He has committed the ultimate Roman sin, parricide. In front of him, executioners drag forward a heavy leather sack. It is not empty. Inside, a starving dog, an aggressive rooster, a frantic monkey, and a venomous viper coil against one another in a claustrophobic frenzy. Before the man is cast in, they beat his back with blood-red rods until his flesh is a shredded canvas of crimson. They shove him into the sack with the beasts and sew it shut while his screams echo off the water. This was Poena Cullei, the punishment of the sack. As Cicero explained the grim logic, the killer of his own blood must be denied the sky, the sun, the water, and the earth. He who destroyed the source of his life must be stripped of every element that sustains it. This is not a dark fable, it is a reality etched into the 12 Tables, Rome's oldest legal code, dating back to 450 BC. But the sack was merely the overture. Ancient Rome perfected 12 distinct methods of torture designed to systematically dismantle the body, the spirit, and the very memory of its victims. We aren't talking about the gladiators or the beasts of the Colosseum you've seen in movies. Today, we witness what Rome did in the shadows and the public squares, the punishments reserved for traitors, deserters, parricides, and the impure Vestal Virgins. This is the history your teachers skipped and what Hollywood lacks the spine to show. I am scripthistorians, and here there is no censorship, only the raw, visceral truth Rome wanted the world to forget. If you want history without filters, hit subscribe now, because what comes next makes the arena look like a children's show. We begin with how Rome dealt with those who betrayed the state. In the very heart of the city, on a cliffside where the screams of the falling could be heard by senators, in mid-debate stood the Tarpeian Rock. Located on the southern summit of the Capitoline Hill, this precipice rose 80 feet above a jagged graveyard of stones. For a Roman, there was no more symbolic place to die. The rock was named after Tarpeia, in a young woman who allegedly opened Rome's gates to the Sabines in exchange for the gold on their arms, meaning their bracelets. Instead, the soldiers crushed her under their heavy shields, teaching Rome its first lesson on the price of treachery. From that moment on, the rock became the designated execution site for internal traitors. The procedure was brutally minimalist. The condemned was led to the edge, while crowds gathered below. Without a word or ceremony, they were hurled into the void. The symbolism was devastating and deliberate. To be thrown from the Tarpeian Rock was to be literally cast out from the centre of Roman society. Their shattered bodies were left where citizens could see them, often denied a proper burial, which meant their souls were condemned to wander without peace in the afterlife. The historical records show that in 384 BC, Marcus Manlius Capitolinus, a war hero who had once saved the city, was hurled from this very cliff after being accused of seeking kingship. Archaeological evidence suggests the area below the cliff accumulated so many remains over the centuries that periodic clearings were required. Emperor Claudius reportedly attended these executions personally, taking a perverse interest in examining the trajectory and impact of the bodies. The Tarpeian Rock stood as a jagged reminder that in Rome, the distance between the height of power and a broken corpse was only 80 feet. While the cliff was for citizens, Rome devised something far more prolonged for those it deemed less than human. Crucifixion was so barbaric that Roman citizens were legally exempt from it. It was reserved for slaves, pirates, and enemies of the state. The condemned would first be stripped and scourged with a flagrum, a whip embedded with bone and metal, until their back was a mess of exposed muscle and bone. They were then forced to carry the patibulum, the crossbeam, through the streets while crowds jeered and spat. At the sight, executioners would drive iron spikes through the wrists and feet. death came through a slow, agonizing cycle of exhaustion and asphyxiation. To breathe, the victim had to push up on their nailed feet, a movement that sent lightning bolts of pain through their nervous system. This could last for days under the blistering sun. The most infamous mass crucifixion occurred in 71 BC, following the defeat of Spartacus's slave rebellion. General Marcus Licinius Crassus ordered 6,000 rebels to be crucified along the Appian Way, the main road from Rome to Capua. For 125 miles, travellers were forced to walk past thousands of dying men. To ensure the message lasted, Roman executioners used a small seat called a sedile to support the victim's weight, just enough to prevent them from suffocating too quickly, extending the torment. Plutarch recorded that the bodies were left to rot on their crosses long after they died, serving as a gruesome wallpaper for the Roman countryside. The message was unmistakable. This is what happens when you challenge the eagle of Rome. Crucifixion wasn't just an execution, it was a state-sponsored billboard of terror that utilized the human body as its medium. Rome's cruelty wasn't just directed outward, it was a tool used to forge the world's most disciplined army. When a legion showed cowardice or mutiny, they faced decimation, a word derived from the Latin decima, meaning to take a tenth. The process was a psychological masterpiece of horror. A disgraced unit was divided into groups of 10. These were men who had bled together, shared rations, and protected each other's lives for years. Each group was forced to draw lots. The man who drew the short straw was not executed by a professional killer. He was beaten to death by the other 9 members of his 10th group. They used clubs and stones, raining blows upon their friend until his skull shattered. To survive was almost as bad as to die, as the remaining soldiers were forced to camp outside the safety of the fortifications and eat raw barley like animals. The most famous instance of this occurred in 71 BC. It's when Crassus revived the ancient punishment to motivate his troops against Spartacus. 500 men died at the hands of their best friends that day, their screams echoing across the camp as a reminder that the general was more dangerous than the enemy. The military writer Frontinus noted that units which survived decimation often became Rome's fiercest fighters, driven by a desperate, suicidal need to wash away the stigma of their shame. It was a dehumanizing system that broke the bonds of brotherhood to ensure absolute obedience to the state. In the Roman military, the lottery of death ensured that every soldier was both a victim and a murderer, bound to the empire by the blood of his own comrades. For individual military failures, such as falling asleep on guard duty or losing a weapon in battle, Rome utilized the fustuarium. The condemned soldier would be stood before his assembled legion. The commanding tribune would lightly touch the man with a cudgel, a ceremonial signal. Instantly, every soldier in the unit would fall upon him with clubs and stones. Unlike decimation, which was a lottery, the fustuarium was a focused vent for the unit's collective anger. Polybius described the aftermath. Even those who managed to break through the line and run were never truly safe. They were legally dead. They could never return home, and no family member would dare give them shelter. The public nature of the killing made the entire legion complicit in the execution, ensuring that the fear of their own messmates was a more powerful motivator than the fear of a barbarian's blade. Rome eventually realized that executions could be more than just warnings, they could be entertainment. Damnatio ad Bestias, or condemnation to the beasts, transformed the killing of criminals into a high-budget theatrical production. Underneath the Colosseum floor lay the Hypogeum, a complex network of tunnels and elevators that allowed lions, tigers, and bears to emerge magically through trapdoors. These executions were often staged as mythological plays. A criminal might be dressed as Orpheus and given a lyre, told that his music might soothe the beasts. For a moment, the crowd would go silent as the animals circled. Then a bear would be goaded with hot irons until it tore the musician limb from limb. The poet martial witnessed such spectacles and praised them. claiming that, in the arena, the fables of the gods became the bloody reality of Rome. During the games of Emperor Trajan in 107 AD, 11,000 animals were slaughtered alongside thousands of criminals over 123 days. Lions were kept in darkness and starved to ensure a frenzy the moment they hit the light of the arena. The crowd would place bets on which limb would be torn off first, while vendors sold wine and snacks in the stands. Children watched from their parents' shoulders as men were eviscerated for lunchtime amusement. This was not just about getting rid of criminals, it was about demonstrating Rome's absolute dominion over the natural world. By turning death into a choreographed dance of predators and prey, the state turned the Roman citizenry into voyeurs of violence, addicted to the scent of blood on the sand. Perhaps the most theatrical and sadistic of all was vivicrepium, burning alive. This reached its zenith under Emperor Nero following the Great Fire of Rome in 64 AD. Seeking a scapegoat, Nero targeted the early Christians, turning their executions into a garden party. His executioners would coat the victims in wax, pitch, and flammable resins, then impale them on poles in his private gardens on the Vatican Hill. As night fell, the victims were set ablaze. They became human torches, lighting the paths while Nero drove his chariot among the guests, playing the role of both host and executioner. Tacitus described the scene with horror, noting that the mockery added to their deaths was as cruel as the flames. Today, St. Peter's Basilica stands on the very ground where these lights once flickered, a silent testament to a place where human suffering was once used as a literal decoration for an emperor's vanity. For those who committed crimes against the majesty of the state, Rome employed pulveratio, death by crushing. War elephants, often captured from Carthage or the East, were trained to kill with agonizing precision. They wouldn't just step on a victim, they were taught to crush a man's limbs one by one, directed by a handler to maximize the duration of the agony. But even more terrifying than the destruction of the body was the destruction of the legacy, Damnatio memoriae. When the Senate decreed this, they ordered the total erasure of an individual from history. Statues were decapitated or recarved, names were chiseled out of public monuments, and wills were voided. For a Roman, whose entire sense of worth was tied to their fama, reputation, and ancestors, this was the ultimate horror, to be unexisted, as if they had never drawn breath. As the empire expanded, it adopted foreign horrors like scaphism or the boats. Reserved for those who betrayed military secrets, the victim was stripped and fastened between two hollowed-out logs, with their head and limbs protruding. They were force-fed milk and honey until they developed explosive diarrhea. Then their skin was coated in honey to attract swarms of wasps and flies. Left to float on a stagnant pond, the victim was slowly eaten alive by insects breeding within their own waste. Death took weeks. Similarly, mors per ignem lentum, slow fire, used metal chairs or bronze bulls heated from below to roast victims at a controlled temperature. These methods were designed for the connoisseur of cruelty, executions where the goal was not the end of life, but the absolute maximum duration of the transition between living and dead. The most haunting punishment was reserved for the Vestal Virgins, the priestesses who guarded Rome's sacred fire. If they broke their vow of chastity, they could not be executed by hand, as their blood was too sacred to spill. Instead, Rome utilized a legal fiction. The priestess was led to a small underground chamber near the Colline Gate, containing a bed, a lamp, and a single loaf of bread with a flask of water. Once she descended the ladder, the entrance was sealed and covered with earth. Technically, the Romans didn't kill her. They simply placed her in a room and let the gods decide her fate. In reality, it was a slow death by suffocation and starvation in total darkness. The chief Vestal Cornelia was famously sent to this living tomb by Emperor Domitian, maintaining her dignity until the moment the stone was rolled into place, sealing her forever in the silence of the earth. We have witnessed 12 methods that Rome perfected to govern through fear. From the heights of the Tarpeian Rock to the suffocating silence of the Vestal's tomb, every drop of blood spilled was a calculated investment in the empire's stability. Seneca once wrote that he who has made the infliction of punishment his trade strives to find pleasure in the punishing. In that reflection lies Rome's darkest truth. These penalties were never about justice. They were about the theatre of power. Today the Colosseum is a postcard, but if you walk its tunnels at dusk, you might still hear the iron gates creaking and the roar of a crowd that once found joy in the destruction of their fellow man. A civilization